I knew something was wrong the moment I saw the surveyors on my back property line, but I never imagined the HOA would actually build their new clubhouse 3 feet onto my land. My name is Xavier Quincy, and I've lived in Ridgemont Springs, Arizona for 8 years. It's one of those master-planned communities that sprouted up in the desert outside Phoenix, where every house looks vaguely Mediterranean, and the HOA rules dictate everything from your mailbox color to how many cacti you can plant in your front yard. When my wife died 4 years ago, I'd considered selling and moving somewhere without so many regulations. But this was the house where we'd built our life together, and I couldn't bring myself to leave. The HOA had been talking about building a new clubhouse for over 2 years. The old one was tiny, barely large enough for the monthly meetings and the occasional baby shower. Brenda Patterson, the HOA president, had made the new clubhouse her personal crusade. She was exactly the type of woman you'd expect to run an HOA with an iron fist. Mid-50s, blonde highlights that were always perfectly maintained, and a voice that could cut through concrete when she was displeased. I'd attended the meeting where they discussed the location. They planned to build it on the community common area that bordered my property. I owned one of the larger lots in the development, a corner piece that backed up to what was supposed to be communal green space. The plans they showed at the meeting had the clubhouse situated entirely on HOA property, at least 20 feet from my fence line. I'd even voted in favor of it. Construction started in early March. I work from home as a software consultant, so I heard every truck, every shout, every piece of machinery. For the first few weeks, I didn't pay much attention beyond the general annoyance of constant noise. But then one morning in late March, I was taking my coffee out to the back patio when I noticed something odd. The foundation they'd poured seemed much closer to my property line than I remembered from the plans. I walked down to my back fence, coffee mug in hand, and studied the construction site. The concrete foundation extended right up to my fence, and as I looked closer, I realized with growing alarm that part of it actually crossed onto my side. My fence wasn't exactly on the property line. I'd built it about a foot inside my boundary to make sure there were no disputes, which meant the construction was definitely on my land. I immediately called the HOA office. The secretary, a timid woman named Margaret, told me Brenda was unavailable but would call me back. 2 days passed with no return call. I called again. This time Brenda answered. "Xavier, I'm very busy with the clubhouse project," she said, her tone suggesting I was wasting her time. "What's this about?" "The clubhouse foundation is on my property," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "It needs to stop until we can sort this out." There was a pause. "That's impossible. We had everything surveyed before we started construction." "Then your survey was wrong. I'd like to see the paperwork." Another pause, longer this time. "I'll have someone look into it and get back to you." That was a Friday. The weekend passed, Monday came, and construction continued. I called again Tuesday morning. Margaret said Brenda was in meetings all day. Wednesday, same story. By Thursday, I was furious. The walls were going up now, framed lumber rising from that foundation that I was increasingly certain was encroaching on my property. I decided to handle this myself. I called a surveyor, a company that had good reviews online and wasn't associated with the development. I explained the situation, and they said they could come out the following Monday. The fee was $800, but I needed proof. That weekend, I dug through my closing documents from when I'd bought the house. Sure enough, I found my property survey, complete with the exact measurements and boundary markers. I walked the perimeter of my lot with a tape measure, checking distances from the corner markers that were still embedded in the ground. The math was undeniable. The clubhouse foundation crossed my property line by approximately 3 feet along a 40-foot stretch. Monday morning, the surveyor arrived. His name was Tom Chen, a methodical man in his 60s who'd been surveying land in Arizona for over 30 years. He spent 4 hours taking measurements, checking sight lines, using equipment I didn't understand. When he finished, he showed me his findings on his tablet. "Mr. Quincy, the structure under construction encroaches on your property by 3 feet at its closest point, extending for approximately 42 linear feet. The total area of your land currently occupied by the structure is roughly 126 square feet. Can you put that in writing?" I'll have a full report to you by Friday. I can also file it with the county if you need me to. Please do. He nodded sympathetically. This happens more often than you'd think. Usually it's an honest mistake, but sometimes. He trailed off diplomatically. After he left, I walked down to the construction site. The foreman was supervising the installation of roof trusses. I approached and introduced myself. I'm Xavier Quincy. I own the property right there. I pointed to my house. Sure, nice to meet you. This is going to be a great facility when it's done. I'm sure it would be, except you're building it on my land. His expression shifted from friendly to wary. What? The structure crosses my property line by 3 feet. I just had a survey done. The foreman, whose name was Rick, pulled out his own set of plans. We spent 10 minutes comparing his documents to my survey notes. I could see the concern growing in his eyes. Look, Mr. Quincy, I just build what I'm told to build, where I'm told to build it. The HOA provided the survey and the site plan. If there's a problem, you need to take it up with them. I've been trying to for 3 weeks. They won't return my calls. Rick shook his head. I'm sorry, man. That's above my pay grade, but I can't stop work without authorization from the HOA. They're the ones paying me. I understood his position, but it didn't make me any less frustrated. I went home and called the HOA office again. This time I didn't ask for Brenda. I asked for the HOA attorney's contact information. Margaret hesitated, then said she couldn't give out that information without board approval. Then I need to speak to any board member, right now. They're all working, Mr. Quincy. The board members have jobs. So do I, and I'm currently watching a crew build a structure on my property without my permission. That's called trespassing, and it's also potentially theft of property. Get someone on the phone in the next hour, or I'm calling the police. 20 minutes later, my phone rang. It was Gerald Mosher, the HOA vice president. Gerald was a reasonable guy, an accountant who'd gotten roped into HOA service because no one else would volunteer. We'd talked at neighborhood barbecues a few times. Xavier, Margaret said there's some concern about the clubhouse location. I explained everything, the encroachment, the ignored calls, the new survey. Gerald listened without interrupting. Jesus, he said when I finished. I had no idea. Brenda's been managing this project pretty independently. Let me get the original survey and compare it to yours. Can you email me your surveyor's report? I'll have it by Friday. Okay, don't do anything drastic until then, all right? Let me talk to Brenda and the rest of the board. I'm sure we can work this out. I wanted to believe him, but I'd been given the runaround for 3 weeks already. Still, Gerald seemed genuinely concerned, so I agreed to wait for the official survey report. Friday afternoon, Tom Chen emailed me a comprehensive 20-page document complete with photographs, measurements, and legal descriptions. It was absolutely clear. The clubhouse was on my property. I forwarded it to Gerald immediately. He called me Saturday morning. Xavier, I've reviewed your survey and compared it to what the HOA used. You're right. The clubhouse is on your land. Relief flooded through me. Thank you for acknowledging that. So what's the next step? Do they tear it down and rebuild in the right spot? There was a long pause. I brought this to an emergency board meeting last night. She's disputing your survey. She says the HOA's survey is correct and yours is wrong. On what basis? She says our surveyor is licensed and reputable, and she doesn't trust a surveyor you hired because you have a vested interest in the outcome. My jaw clenched. That's insane. The measurements are objective. Either the structure is on my land or it isn't. I know. Look, I agree with you. So does Karen Thompson on the board. Karen was a reasonable woman who worked as a teacher. But Brenda has convinced Linda Walsh and Deborah Hughes that your surveyor might be biased. And they're the majority. They voted to continue construction. They can't do that. They don't have my permission to build on my property. Gerald's voice dropped. Xavier, I think you need to get a lawyer. I'm sorry. I tried, but Brenda's dug in on this, and once she makes up her mind about something, she's immovable. Between you and me, I think she knows she screwed up and she's trying to bluster her way through it rather than admit fault. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen staring at my cold coffee. I'd lived in this community for 8 years. I'd paid my HOA dues on time, followed every ridiculous rule, never complained about the perpetual stream of violations they sent out for minor infractions. And now they were literally stealing my land and refusing to acknowledge it. I could call the police, but I suspected this fell into a civil dispute category. I could get an injunction to stop construction, but that would cost money and time. Or I could do something else. An idea began forming in my mind. It was petty, maybe even vindictive, but the more I thought about it, the more appealing it became. If Brenda wanted to pretend the clubhouse was on HOA property, I'd let her. I'd let them finish construction. I'd let them plan their grand opening. And then I'd remind them exactly whose land they'd built on. Monday morning, I called a law firm in Phoenix that specialized in real estate disputes. I met with an attorney named Sarah Feldman the next day. She was in her 40s, sharp-eyed and no nonsense. I showed her all my documentation. "This is pretty clear-cut," she said after reviewing everything. "They're trespassing and they have constructed an unauthorized structure on your property. We can file for an immediate injunction to stop construction." "What if I don't want to stop construction?" She looked up, puzzled. "Why wouldn't you?" "Because stopping it now just means they tear down a foundation and some framing. I want them to finish it. I want them to invest all the money, all the time, all the effort, and then I want to serve them with papers making it clear that they've built their clubhouse on my property, and I'm not giving them permission to use it." A slow understanding spread across Sarah's face. "You want leverage. I want them to understand they can't just steamroll people and ignore the rules when it's inconvenient for them. Brenda Patterson has been a tyrant for years. She needs to learn there are consequences." Sarah leaned back in her chair. "I appreciate the sentiment, but I should warn you. If you know about the encroachment and allow them to continue building, they could argue that you implicitly consented. Even though I've complained repeatedly and they've ignored me, it's a risk. A judge might see it that way. The safer route is to stop them now." I considered this. What if I send them a cease and desist letter, official notice that they're building on my property without permission, and demanding they stop immediately? Then, when they ignore it, I have documentation that they proceeded despite being explicitly warned. Sarah nodded slowly. That would work. In fact, it would work very well. We'd send it certified mail, return receipt requested. If they continue construction after receiving it, they're knowingly trespassing and their legal position becomes indefensible. Let's do it. The letter went out Thursday. Brenda signed for it Friday morning. I know because I tracked the delivery confirmation obsessively. The letter stated in clear legal language that the clubhouse encroached on my property, that I did not consent to its presence, and that the HOA must immediately cease construction and remove the structure. I waited to see what would happen. Friday afternoon, Gerald called me. "Xavier, Brenda is going ballistic. She's claiming your lawyer's letter is harassment and intimidation. She wants to countersue you for interfering with the HOA's legitimate business." "The legitimate business she's conducting on my property?" Gerald sighed heavily. "I tried to tell her she should at least get an independent survey to verify one way or the other. She refused. She says it's a waste of HOA money because she knows she's right." "So construction is continuing?" "Yeah. She told the contractor to ignore your letter." "Perfect. Thanks for letting me know, Gerald. Over the next month, I watched the clubhouse take shape. It was actually a nice building, I had to admit. Adobe-style architecture that matched the neighborhood aesthetic, large windows, a covered patio area. They were spending serious money on it. Based on the construction activity, I estimated the budget was somewhere north of $400,000. I photographed everything, every stage of construction, every delivery, every worker. I documented it all meticulously. Sarah had advised me to create a comprehensive record, so that's what I did. I also started researching property law in Arizona, reading up on adverse possession, easements, and trespassing statutes. In mid-May, I noticed they were starting on the interior finishes. The exterior was essentially complete. It looked professional and polished. Through my back fence, I could see workers installing what looked like expensive light fixtures and tile work. Brenda sent out an email to the entire community in late May announcing the grand opening would be June 15th. There would be a ribbon-cutting ceremony, catered food, tours of the facility. She'd even gotten a minor local celebrity, a weatherman from one of the Phoenix TV stations, to attend. The email gushed about what an amazing amenity this would be for the community and how property values would increase. I forwarded the email to Sarah with a simple message. Grand opening is June 15th. She called me immediately. Xavier, I want to make sure you understand what you're doing. Once they finish construction and hold this grand opening, they're going to have invested somewhere between $400,000 and $500,000. When you serve them with papers, their only options will be to negotiate with you, tear down the building, or try to fight you in court, which they'll lose. This is going to cause a massive conflict. I know. Just making sure. I'll have everything ready to file the day after their grand opening. We'll file a lawsuit for trespassing, demand they remove the structure, and seek damages for unauthorized use of your property. Perfect. The next 2 weeks were surreal. I watched the clubhouse preparations from my back patio like I was observing a play. They landscaped around the building with native plants and decorative rock. They installed exterior lighting that was admittedly quite beautiful. They put up a sign, Ridgemont Springs Community Clubhouse. Brenda sent out 2 more emails building up hype for the grand opening. She mentioned in one of them that the clubhouse had come in slightly over budget but was worth every penny. The final cost, she revealed, was $475,000. I forwarded that email to Sarah too. She replied, "Ouch." 3 days before the grand opening, I received a notice in my mailbox. It was from the HOA, informing me that my backyard fence needed repainting as it was showing signs of weathering inconsistent with community standards. The notice was signed by Brenda Patterson. I actually laughed. After everything, she was still trying to exert her petty authority. I photographed the notice and filed it with all my other documentation. June 15th arrived with typical Arizona summer weather, blazing sun and temperatures pushing toward 110 degrees. The grand opening was scheduled for 6 in the evening to avoid the worst of the heat. I had a perfect view of the clubhouse from my back patio. Around 4, the catering trucks arrived. Workers set up tables on the covered patio area, part of which was definitely on my property. By 5:30, residents started arriving. I recognized most of my neighbors, people I'd lived near for years. They seemed excited, chatting and laughing as they inspected the new facility. At 5:45, I put on a nice shirt and walked down to join the party. The scene was festive. Maybe 100 people had turned out. The caterers were serving appetizers and drinks. Children ran around playing while adults admired the building. I helped myself to some kind of fancy bruschetta and surveyed the crowd. Gerald spotted me and came over, looking uncomfortable. "Xavier, I'm surprised to see you here. It's a community event, isn't it?" "Yeah, but given everything," he lowered his voice, "Brenda's going to lose her mind if she sees you. I'm a resident. I paid my HOA dues. I have every right to be here." Gerald looked like he wanted to argue but couldn't find the grounds. "Just try not to cause a scene, okay?" "I'm not here to cause a scene. I'm here to tour the new clubhouse." At precisely 6 o'clock, Brenda took position at a microphone someone had set up near the front entrance. She was dressed like she was attending a gallery opening, all in white with turquoise jewelry. She launched into a speech about community, vision, and the bright future of Ridgemont Springs. "This clubhouse represents what we can accomplish when we work together," she said, her voice ringing with self-satisfaction. "When I became HOA president 3 years ago, I promised I would enhance our community amenities. Today, I'm delivering on that promise." There was applause. I clapped along, a smile fixed on my face. Brenda continued for another 10 minutes, thanking various people and committees. Then the weatherman said a few words, joking about how the clubhouse was air-conditioned, which made it his new favorite place in Arizona. More laughter, more applause. Finally, Brenda produced a pair of oversized ceremonial scissors. "And now, it's my pleasure to officially open the Ridgemont Springs Community Clubhouse." She cut the ribbon. Everyone cheered. The crowd surged forward to tour the interior. I held back, waiting for the initial rush to subside. After about 15 minutes, I went inside. The interior was impressive. A large multi-purpose room with a polished concrete floor, a commercial kitchen, 2 bathrooms, and a smaller room that could serve as an office or meeting space. Everything was new and clean and expensive looking. I took photos of everything on my phone, making sure to capture all the details. A few neighbors said hello. I chatted pleasantly with them about how nice the facility was. No one had any idea what was coming. Around 7:30, Brenda was holding court near the kitchen, accepting congratulations from a group of residents. I approached the group. "Brenda, you've really outdone yourself," I said. "This is an incredible facility." She turned to me, and her expression froze. For a moment, I thought she might ask me to leave, but there were too many people around. Instead, she forced a tight smile. "Xavier, thank you. I'm glad you appreciate it." Must have been a huge project to coordinate. It was. Months of planning, dealing with contractors, managing the budget. But it was worth it to give our community something special. "I'm sure everyone will get a lot of use out of it," I said. "I know I'm looking forward to it." Something flickered in her eyes, suspicion maybe, but she just nodded. I excused myself and rejoined the party. I stayed until almost 9, eating catered food, touring the building multiple times, chatting with neighbors. It was a lovely event. Brenda had really pulled out all the stops. When I finally walked home, I felt a strange calm. Tomorrow, everything would change. The next morning, Sarah filed the lawsuit in Maricopa County Superior Court. The complaint was thorough and damning: trespassing, conversion of property, unjust enrichment, and several other causes of action. We included my survey, Tom Chen's expert report, photographs showing the encroachment, copies of all my communications with the HOA, and the certified cease and desist letter they'd ignored. We also filed for an emergency restraining order prohibiting the HOA from using the clubhouse until the matter was resolved. The court clerk stamped everything received at 9:15 a.m. By 10 o'clock, a process server was on his way to deliver the papers to Brenda personally. I was working at my desk when my phone started ringing. Gerald, of course. I let it go to voicemail. He called back immediately, then again. Finally, I answered. "Xavier, what the hell have you done? I filed a lawsuit to protect my property rights. You couldn't have said something yesterday, during the grand opening, instead of letting us all celebrate while you were planning to sue us?" I tried saying something for weeks, Gerald. No one listened. Brenda called my surveyor biased, refused to get an independent verification, and told the contractors to ignore my cease and desist letter. What else was I supposed to do? "But you let us finish the entire building. That's $475,000. I told you to stop. You didn't stop. That's not my fault." Gerald made a strangled sound. "The judge granted a restraining order. We can't use the clubhouse we just opened yesterday. Do you understand how this makes the HOA look, how it makes me look? I'm getting calls from residents demanding to know what's going on." Then maybe Brenda should have listened when I told her she was building on my property. She's talking about fighting this. She says no judge will force us to tear down the building. She's welcome to try. I have a survey from a licensed professional. She has a survey that's demonstrably wrong. The law is pretty clear about property boundaries, Gerald. He hung up without saying goodbye. Over the next few days, the neighborhood erupted. Word spread fast about the lawsuit. I started receiving angry calls and emails from neighbors. Some people accused me of sabotaging the community. Others called me petty, vindictive, unreasonable. A few threatened to sue me for decreasing their property values. I responded to none of it. Sarah had advised me to let her handle all communications, so that's what I did. On June 20th, the HOA filed a response to my lawsuit. They argued that I had implicitly consented to the construction by not seeking an immediate injunction, that my damages were minimal, and that public policy favored not tearing down a valuable community building over a minor boundary dispute. They also filed their own survey from the original surveyor they'd used. Sarah called me after reviewing their response. Their survey is garbage. The guy didn't properly locate the boundary markers. It's almost professionally negligent. I've already contacted Tom Chen about providing expert testimony, and he's willing to explain to a judge exactly how their surveyor screwed up. What about their argument that I let them build it so I can't complain now? We have documentation of your repeated complaints and the cease and desist letter they ignored. That argument isn't going anywhere. The judge already granted the temporary restraining order, which shows he thinks you have a strong case. So what happens next? We have a preliminary injunction hearing in 3 weeks. That's where the judge will decide whether the restraining order stays in place until the full trial. I expect we'll win that. Then we'll move toward either a trial or, more likely, a settlement. What kind of settlement? That depends on what you want. They could pay you fair market value for the land and you grant them an easement. They could tear down the portion that encroaches and rebuild it correctly. They could pay you substantial damages for the trespass, or, if you're feeling generous, you could sell them the strip of land for a premium. I'll think about it. The preliminary injunction hearing was scheduled for July 12th. In the meantime, the clubhouse sat empty, this beautiful new facility that no one could use. Brenda sent out a community email blaming me for the situation, characterizing me as a difficult person who was hurting the entire community over a minor technical boundary issue. I got more angry calls. Someone left a nasty note on my doorstep. A few neighbors stopped talking to me entirely. But I also got unexpected support. Karen Thompson, the board member who'd agreed with Gerald that the survey showed encroachment, sent me a private email apologizing for how Brenda had handled things. A few other neighbors reached out quietly to say they understood why I'd done what I'd done, even if they wished there'd been another way. Gerald called me again the week before the hearing. This time his tone was different. Tired, defeated. Xavier, Brenda's hired an attorney. The HOA is spending thousands of dollars. We don't have to fight this lawsuit. The special assessment to cover legal fees is going to be hugely unpopular. She's destroying the HOA's finances over her pride. That's not my problem, Gerald. I know it's not. Look, I'm calling because I want to try one more time to settle this before we go to court. What would it take? Name your price. I'd been thinking about this for weeks. I want 3 things. First, Brenda Patterson resigns as HOA president and agrees not to run for any board position for at least 5 years. Second, the HOA pays all my legal fees, which are currently around $15,000. Third, the HOA pays me fair market value for the land, which based on comparable sales is about $40,000, and I'll grant them an easement to keep the clubhouse where it is. Gerald was quiet for a long moment. That's more than reasonable. Actually, way more reasonable than I expected. But Brenda will never agree to resign. That's the one thing she won't do. Then I guess we'll see what the judge says. Xavier, you have to understand, Brenda's entire identity is wrapped up in being HOA president. It's all she has. Her kids are grown. Her husband travels for work constantly. She's retired from her job. The HOA is her whole life. Asking her to resign is like asking her to stop existing. That's still not my problem. She built a clubhouse on my property, ignored my complaints, dismissed my evidence, and has spent the last month telling everyone I'm the villain. I'm done being accommodating. The hearing arrived. Maricopa County Superior Court was in downtown Phoenix, a 40-minute drive from Ridgemont Springs. Sarah and I arrived early and went over our arguments one final time. The judge is Patricia Reeves, Sarah told me. She's been on the bench for 12 years, has a reputation for being no-nonsense and property rights focused. This is a good draw for us. The HOA's attorney was a man named David Park, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Brenda sat next to him, rigid and furious. The rest of the HOA board was there too: Gerald, Karen, Linda Walsh, and Deborah Hughes. Judge Reeves took the bench promptly at 9 a.m. She was a severe-looking woman in her early 60s with gray hair and sharp eyes. This is the matter of Quincy versus Ridgemont Springs Homeowners Association. We're here on the plaintiff's motion for a preliminary injunction. Counsel, let's hear arguments. Sarah stood and presented our case methodically. She showed the 2 surveys side by side, pointed out the discrepancies, explained Tom Chen's credentials and methodology. She walked through my attempts to resolve the issue before filing suit. She showed the cease and desist letter and documented proof that construction continued afterward. Your Honor, this is straightforward trespass. The defendant built a structure on my client's property without permission, continued building after being explicitly told to stop, and has refused to acknowledge the clear evidence of encroachment. The preliminary injunction should remain in place until this matter is fully adjudicated. David Park's argument was less convincing. He focused heavily on the completed building and the money spent, arguing that the harm to the HOA and community outweighed the minimal encroachment. He tried to characterize my delay in seeking an injunction as consent, but Judge Reeves cut him off. Counsel, I've read the plaintiff's cease and desist letter dated May 5th. It explicitly demands the HOA stop construction and remove the structure. How does that constitute consent? Your Honor, the plaintiff could have sought an emergency injunction at that time but chose not to. Or the defendant could have stopped building when told they were trespassing. Continue. Park struggled through the rest of his argument. When he finished, Judge Reeves looked down at her notes. I've reviewed the surveys. The plaintiff's survey is more thorough and properly documents the boundary markers. The defendant's survey appears to have incorrectly located the property line, which is why the structure was built in the wrong place. This is not a close call. She looked directly at David Park. Counsel, your client built a clubhouse on someone else's property. That's trespassing, regardless of how much money was spent or how nice the building is. The preliminary injunction will remain in place. The defendant is prohibited from using or accessing the structure until this matter is resolved. Brenda stood up suddenly. Your Honor, that's not fair. We built this for the community. Judge Reeves's expression didn't change. Madam, you need to sit down and let your attorney speak for you. But we had a survey. We did everything right. Madam, sit down now, or I'll hold you in contempt. David Park pulled Brenda back into her seat, whispering urgently to her. Judge Reeves waited until order was restored. The court strongly encourages the parties to settle this matter. Mr. Park, you should advise your client that if this goes to trial, she's going to lose, and the outcome will likely be far more expensive than negotiating a reasonable settlement now. This hearing is adjourned. The gavel came down. We stood as Judge Reeves left the courtroom. In the hallway afterward, David Park approached Sarah. Can we talk? They stepped aside while I waited. Brenda glared at me from across the hall, but she didn't approach. The other board members stood in a cluster, talking in low voices. Gerald met my eyes and gave a small nod that might have been respect or resignation. After a few minutes, Sarah came back. They want to talk settlement. Park basically admitted they don't have a case and Brenda needs to accept reality. Same terms? Let's start there and see what they say. The settlement negotiations took 2 weeks. David Park was professional and practical. The problem was his client. Brenda rejected every proposal, no matter how reasonable. She offered to pay me for the land but refused to resign. She offered to have me on the board but wouldn't pay my legal fees. She suggested splitting the cost but wouldn't grant that she'd been wrong. Finally, on July 28th, Gerald called me directly. Xavier, I need to tell you something in confidence. The board is voting to remove Brenda as president. We have the votes. Me, Karen, and Linda. Linda finally saw the light after the judge's comments. We're meeting tomorrow night to do it. Why are you telling me? Because once she's gone, I think we can settle this. But I need to know you'll still accept the same terms if someone other than Brenda is president. If the HOA pays my legal fees and fair market value for the land, and Brenda isn't in a position of authority, yes, we can settle. Okay, I'll call you after the meeting. The next evening, my phone rang at 8:45. Gerald sounded exhausted. It's done. Brenda is no longer HOA president. She'll remain on the board until her term expires next year, but she has no leadership role. I'm taking over as president. How did she take it? About as well as you'd expect. She threatened to sue us. She called us all traitors. She said we were destroying the community. But the vote was legal and binding. She's out. 2 days later, Sarah and David Park finalized the settlement agreement. The HOA would pay me $42,000 for the land where the clubhouse stood, slightly more than my initial ask, because Gerald wanted to include compensation for the hassle. They would pay all my legal fees, which had grown to $18,000. I would grant them an easement allowing the clubhouse to remain in its current location. And the settlement agreement included a clause stating that Brenda Patterson was prohibited from holding any HOA leadership position for 7 years. We signed the papers on August 5th. By August 10th, I'd received both checks. The restraining order was lifted and the clubhouse reopened on August 12th. I didn't attend the reopening. The aftermath was complicated. Some neighbors remained angry with me, convinced I'd been unreasonable and destroyed community harmony over a technicality. Others understood that I'd been defending my property rights against an HOA that had overstepped badly. Most people just wanted to move on and use the clubhouse. Brenda stopped speaking to me entirely, which was fine. I'd heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she'd become increasingly bitter and isolated, blaming everyone else for her removal. She stayed on the board for the remainder of her term but rarely attended meetings. Gerald turned out to be a much better HOA president. He was practical, communicative, and willing to admit when he didn't know something. Under his leadership, the HOA revised its procedures to include better checks and balances, required independent verification for major projects, and implemented a formal dispute resolution process. In September, Gerald stopped by my house with a bottle of decent bourbon. "Peace offering," he said when I opened the door. "I was a coward when I should have stood up to Brenda earlier. I'm sorry for that." I invited him in, and we sat on my back patio, looking at the clubhouse that had caused so much trouble. "Why did she do it?" I asked. "Was it really just too proud to admit she made a mistake?" Gerald took a sip of bourbon. "Partly, but I think it was more than that. Brenda needed to be right. She needed to be in control. She'd spent 3 years building up this image of herself as the person who got things done, who made the tough decisions, who improved the community. Admitting she'd screwed up would have shattered that image. So she was willing to waste $500,000 and destroy her reputation instead. People do irrational things when they're afraid of looking weak." Gerald shook his head. "The sad thing is, if she'd just acknowledged the mistake early on, we could have fixed it cheaply. Moved the building over 3 feet before the foundation was done. Would have cost maybe $10,000 in a week of time. Instead, her pride cost the HOA $60,000 in settlement and legal fees, got her removed as president, and turned half the neighborhood against her." We sat in silence for a while, watching the sunset paint the sky orange and purple. "Do you regret how you handled it?" Gerald asked. I thought about that. "No, I gave them chances to fix it. They chose not to. I'm not going to apologize for defending my property." "That's fair." In October, I attended my first HOA meeting since the lawsuit. I'd avoided them before, but I figured it was time to re-engage with the community. The meeting was in the clubhouse, which still felt strange. Brenda was there, sitting in the back row with her arms crossed. When I walked in, she stared at me with undisguised hostility, but she said nothing. The meeting was routine. Budget discussions, upcoming maintenance projects, complaints about someone's wind chimes. At the end, Gerald asked if there was any new business. An elderly resident named Frank stood up. "I just want to say something about what happened with the clubhouse. I know there was a lot of drama and people took sides, but I've been thinking about it, and Mr. Quincy was right to do what he did. HOAs have too much power, and sometimes they need to be reminded that they have to follow the rules too. We can't expect residents to follow every little regulation if the HOA itself doesn't respect basic property rights." There was scattered applause. A few people nodded agreement. Brenda stood up abruptly and walked out of the room. After the meeting, several neighbors came up to me. Some apologized for being angry earlier. Others thanked me for standing up to the HOA. A few still seemed cool toward me, but that was their choice. Karen Thompson approached me as I was leaving. "That took courage, what you did. A lot of people would have just given in." "I'm not good at giving in," she smiled. "The world needs more of that, I think. People willing to stand up for themselves even when it's uncomfortable." As I walked home that night, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: peace. The clubhouse situation was resolved. My property rights were protected. The HOA had learned a valuable lesson about overreach and accountability. And Brenda Patterson, who'd run the HOA like her personal fiefdom for 3 years, was no longer in a position to steamroll anyone. The money from the settlement sat in my bank account, $60,000 total after legal fees. I'd earned every penny of it, but it still felt strange to profit from the situation. After thinking about it for a few weeks, I decided to donate half of it to a local legal aid organization that helped people fight unfair HOA actions. People who couldn't afford attorneys like Sarah Feldman deserved representation too. In November, I was having coffee on my back patio when I saw someone approaching across the common area. It was Brenda. I tensed, unsure what to expect. She stopped at my fence line, careful not to cross onto my property. Up close, she looked older than I remembered, tired and diminished. "I'm not here to apologize," she said without preamble. "I still think you were wrong to handle it the way you did, but Gerald says I need to make peace with you for the sake of the community, so here I am." "That's not exactly an olive branch, Brenda." "It's the best you're getting." She crossed her arms defensively. I worked hard for this community. I improved property values. I got the streets repaved. I organized neighborhood events. I made this place better. And you destroyed my reputation over a few feet of land. You destroyed your own reputation by refusing to acknowledge a mistake and then doubling down on it. Her jaw clenched. Every decision I made for the good of the community. Except the decision to build on my property without permission. That one was just arrogance. For a moment, I thought she might explode. But then something in her seemed to deflate. It was a mistake. The survey was wrong. I should have checked when you first complained. The words came out grudgingly, like each one cost her something. But by the time I realized that, we'd already invested so much. I thought if I just pushed through, it would all work out. That's not how property law works. I know that now. She was quiet for a moment. I loved being HOA president. It gave me purpose. Now I'm just another resident, and everyone looks at me like I'm the villain. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. You could have avoided all of this. I know. She turned to leave, then paused. For what it's worth, I'm glad the clubhouse is still there. At least that part of the project survived. She walked away before I could respond. I watched her go, this woman who'd caused so much trouble over her inability to admit fault. Part of me hoped she'd learned something from the experience. Another part suspected she'd just found new ways to rationalize her behavior to herself. December brought the holidays and a return to relative normalcy. The clubhouse hosted its first Christmas party, and I actually attended. It was nice to see neighbors enjoying the facility, children playing in the multi-purpose room, while adults chatted over cookies and punch. Gerald found me near the refreshment table. How does it feel being here? Weird. Good, but weird. You should feel proud. You were right, you stood your ground and things worked out. I'm not sure everyone would agree with that assessment. The people whose opinions matter do. He gestured around the room. This place works because you made sure we followed the rules. That's important. As the evening wound down, I stepped outside onto the covered patio. The December air was cool, a relief after months of brutal heat. String lights hung overhead, casting a warm glow. From here, I could see my house, my back fence, the property line that had caused so much conflict. A young couple I didn't know well approached me. The wife was pregnant, probably 7 or 8 months along. Mr. Quincy? I'm Rebecca, and this is my husband, Jason. We moved in last month. Nice to meet you. We heard about what happened with the clubhouse, Jason said. People have, different opinions about it. That's true, Rebecca smiled. We just wanted to say thank you. We almost didn't buy in this neighborhood because of the HOA horror stories we'd heard about other places. But knowing that someone successfully stood up to an overreaching HOA made us feel better about moving here. It means there are limits to what they can do. That perspective hadn't occurred to me. I'm glad it worked out for you. Our realtor said property values actually went up after the lawsuit was settled, Jason added. Something about buyers liking communities where property rights are enforced. After they left, I thought about that. All the neighbors who'd accused me of hurting property values had been wrong. The community was stronger now, not weaker, because the HOA had been forced to acknowledge limits to its authority. January brought HOA elections. Gerald ran for re-election as president and won easily. Karen remained on the board. Linda Walsh decided not to run again, exhausted by the drama. 2 new board members were elected, both of them level-headed people who'd supported the settlement. Brenda didn't run for anything. She attended the election meeting, but sat silently in the back, a shadow of her former imperious self. In February, I ran into Tom Chen, the surveyor, at a hardware store in Phoenix. He recognized me immediately. Mr. Quincy, I heard your case settled. Congratulations. I couldn't have done it without your report. That's kind of you to say. You know, I've been a surveyor for 33 years, and I see this more often than you'd think. HOAs, developers, neighbors, they all assume they know where property lines are without actually checking. Then they're shocked when it turns out they're wrong. The HOA's surveyor made a mistake, right? Tom's expression turned serious. Between you and me? That wasn't a mistake. That was negligence. He didn't properly locate the boundary markers. A first-year surveying student would have caught his error. I reported him to the state licensing board. What happened? He's under investigation. If they find he was negligent, he could lose his license. This wasn't his first complaint either, turns out. I thought about that as I drove home. The ripples from the Clubhouse situation extended further than I'd realized. An incompetent surveyor potentially losing his license. An HOA implementing better oversight procedures. New residents choosing the community because property rights were respected. Brenda learning, however painfully, that she wasn't above accountability. In March, I was working in my front yard when a car pulled up. A woman in her 30s got out carrying a folder. Xavier Quincy? That's me. I'm Jennifer Alders. I'm a reporter with the Phoenix New-Times. I'm working on a story about HOA overreach and abuse of power. Your case against Ridgemont Springs HOA came up in my research, and I'd love to interview you. I hesitated. I'm not sure I want to be in the news. I understand, but your case is important. It's one of the few times I've seen a homeowner successfully fight back against an HOA that was clearly in the wrong. People need to hear these stories so they know it's possible to stand up for themselves. I invited her in, and we talked for over an hour. I told her everything. The ignored complaints, Brenda's refusal to acknowledge the encroachment, the decision to let them finish building, the settlement and its aftermath. Jennifer took notes rapidly, asking smart questions about the legal process and the community impact. "Can I ask why you waited to serve the papers?" she said. "You could have stopped construction much earlier." Because stopping it early would have minimized the consequences. Brenda needed to understand that actions have costs. If I'd gotten an injunction when they'd only poured the foundation, she would have blamed me for blocking the project. By letting them finish, there was no ambiguity about who was responsible for the mess. That's pretty calculated. Maybe, but it worked. The article came out in April. It was fair and well-researched, presenting both sides, but clearly indicating that the HOA had been in the wrong. The headline read, "How One Phoenix Homeowner Fought Back Against HOA, Overreach and Won." The article generated significant attention. I got interview requests from local TV stations, which I declined. My phone number somehow got out, and I received calls from people across Arizona dealing with their own HOA problems, asking for advice. I referred them all to Sarah Feldman or other real estate attorneys. The attention died down after a few weeks, but the story continued circulating online. I saw it posted in Reddit forums about HOA horror stories, in Facebook groups for Arizona homeowners, in discussions about property rights. People seemed to find it satisfying, this narrative of someone standing up to petty authority and winning. In May, almost a year after the grand opening, I attended the HOA annual meeting. The clubhouse was now fully integrated into community life. People used it for birthday parties, meetings, exercise classes. It had become what Brenda had envisioned, a valuable amenity that enhanced the neighborhood. During the meeting, Gerald presented the annual financial report. The HOA was in decent shape despite the legal costs from the previous year. They'd had to implement a small special assessment, but it had been manageable. Property values in the community had increased by an average of 4%, slightly above the Phoenix metro average. At the end of the meeting, Gerald made an announcement. "I want to take a moment to recognize that this year has been challenging for our community. We made mistakes, we faced consequences, and we learned from them. I'm proud of how we've moved forward. Our HOA is stronger now because we understand the importance of following proper procedures and respecting property rights. I hope we never forget those lessons." There was applause. I noticed Brenda wasn't in attendance. After the meeting, I talked with several neighbors. The animosity from the previous year had faded. Most people had moved on, accepted that the situation was resolved, and were enjoying the clubhouse without thinking much about the drama that had surrounded its creation. As spring turned to summer, I found myself reflecting on the entire experience. It had been stressful, expensive, and socially complicated. I'd been vilified by some neighbors, praised by others, and misunderstood by many. But I'd achieved what I set out to do. I'd defended my property rights and held an overreaching HOA accountable. Would I do it again the same way? Probably. The strategy of letting them finish construction had been risky, but it had maximized my leverage and ensured a fair settlement. A quicker resolution might have been less dramatic, but it also might have resulted in the HOA continuing its pattern of dismissing resident concerns. In June, Exactly a year after the grand opening, I was sitting on my back patio when my phone rang. It was Sarah Feldman. "Xavier, I hope you don't mind me calling. I wanted to let you know that 3 more clients have come to me in the past month with HOA disputes, and all 3 cited your case as giving them courage to fight back. I thought you'd want to know your case is having an impact beyond just your own situation." That's good to hear. It is. Too often, people just accept HOA overreach because they don't think they can win or they're afraid of conflict. Your case proved it's possible to stand up for yourself and prevail. After we hung up, I thought about that. I'd never intended to become some kind of symbol or inspiration. I just wanted to protect my property. But if my experience helped others do the same, that was worth something. The summer passed quietly. I worked, maintained my house, attended occasional community events. The clubhouse faded into the background of neighborhood life, just another amenity like the community pool or the walking trails. In August, I saw Brenda for the first time in months. She was at the grocery store, pushing a cart down the produce aisle. Our eyes met briefly. She gave a small nod, not quite friendly, but not hostile either. I nodded back. We didn't speak. Later, I heard from Gerald that Brenda had decided not to run for re-election when her board term expired. She was apparently joining a book club and volunteering at a local library, finding new ways to stay busy in retirement. He thought maybe the whole experience had taught her something about letting go of control. As my second year post-lawsuit began, life in Ridgemont Springs felt normal again. The neighborhood had weathered the conflict and emerged functional, perhaps even healthier. The HOA operated with more transparency and caution. Residents felt more empowered to question decisions and demand accountability. And that beautiful clubhouse, built partially on my former property, served the community it was always meant to serve. On a warm September evening, I attended a neighborhood barbecue at the clubhouse. The patio was full of people grilling, children playing, neighbors laughing and talking. I stood near the edge of the patio, right about where the property line had once divided my land from the HOAs. Gerald joined me, following my gaze. Thinking about the boundary dispute. Hard not to, standing here. Any regrets? I considered the question seriously. The legal fees, the social conflict, the months of stress, had it been worth it? No, I said finally. No regrets. Someone had to draw a line, literally and figuratively. I'm glad it was me. Gerald raised his beer. To drawing lines. I clinked my bottle against his. To drawing lines. As the sun set over the Arizona desert, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, I looked at the clubhouse one more time. It stood solid and permanent, a testament to both community vision and individual property rights. In the end, it had room for both. That night, as I walked home under a canopy of stars, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Complete peace with my decisions. I'd stood up for myself when it mattered. I'd refused to be steamrolled by an authority that had forgotten its limits. And I'd emerged from the conflict with my integrity and my property rights intact. The Ridgemont Springs Community Clubhouse would serve the neighborhood for decades to come. And every time someone used it, they'd be standing on ground that had been purchased fairly through a settlement that recognized property rights and held a HOA accountable for its overreach. That was a legacy I could live with.